folks, welcome to RJA Impact. Today we're going to be talking about Piltdown Man, a paleoanthropological fraud in which bone fragments were presented as the fossilised remains of a previously unknown early human. This is Charles Dawson, a fine-looking British gentleman who was born in Preston in the UK on the 11th of July 1864. After moving with his family to Hastings, Sussex in the UK when he was young, he followed his father into the legal profession. His interest in paleontology appears to have started early in life with his collecting and studying of fossils. As he grew up, he retained his interest in the fossil collecting and became an amateur archaeologist who made a number of both archaeological and paleontological discoveries. This included the Piltdown Man, of which more later. Amongst his fossil finds were teeth from an unknown mammal named Plagiolax dorsoni, 3 new dinosaurs, one named Beryllium dorsoni, and a new form of fossil plant named Salaginella dorsoni. As a result of these finds and his uncanny ability to make spectacular discoveries, he was awarded a number of titular accolades. The British Museum conferred upon him the title of Honorary Collector. He was elected a Fellow of the Geological Society and elected a Fellow to the Society of Antiquaries of London. Interestingly enough, he was never awarded a knighthood, although many others associated with the Piltdown Man find were. The press and eventually the academic world took a shine to him, local press nicknaming him the Wizard of Sussex. He died prematurely in 1916 at the age of 52 from sepsis. In 1850, Charles Darwin published On the Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection. The book set the scientific world on fire with its original approach to the way in which species evolve over time, and it is considered today to be the foundation of evolutionary biology. His theory had a number of problems that even Darwin noted. In particular, why do we not see obvious intermediate or transitional forms between species? Its publication created great debate amongst the public and in particular set theologians and naturalists against each other with opposing views of what the theory could mean. Darwin himself faced criticism and mocking images were published in the press. Over the next half-century, however, Darwin's writings began to be accepted and inevitably people realised that if the apes were man's closest relative, then there was a problem. Why was there no evidence in the fossil record of species between man and the great apes? A great hunt was on for this gap in the record, and the gap was nicknamed the Missing Link. In 1912, Charles Dawson contacted Arthur Smith Woodward, Keeper of Geology at the Natural History Museum in London, claiming that he had found a section of a human-like skull in gravel beds near Piltdown, East Sussex. He claimed that a workman at the Piltdown gravel pit had given him a fragment of the skull 4 years earlier. Woodward joined Dawson and another French paleontologist, Teilhard de Chardin, in Piltdown, and between them during the summer of 1912 they discovered more bones and artefacts at the site that they connected with the original find. The finds included more skull fragments, a set of teeth, and some primitive tools. Interestingly, although Woodward and Desjardins had worked at the site with Dawson between June and September of that year, it was Dawson alone who happened to find the additional skull fragments and half of the lower jawbone. Later that year, on the 18th of December, Charles Dawson presented his findings to the Geological Society of London. Lending credibility to the find, Woodward at the same meeting announced that the skull was similar in many ways to man, but that the brain size was about 2/3 of a modern human. In addition, the jawbone was similar to that of a modern chimpanzee. Now, this supported the general notion at the time that human evolution began with the brain. From the British Museum's reconstruction, Woodward announced the Piltdown Man Eoanthropus dorsoni. Here was the missing link. It was a great coup for Britain too. Neanderthal skeletons had been found in Europe, parts of a Homo erectus skeleton, for example, had been found in Java, Indonesia, and an ancient jawbone had been found in Germany. At the time, European archaeologists gave their British counterparts the nickname pebble hunters, as all they seemed to discover were flints and stone implements. Dawson continued to excavate at Piltdown and in 1914 found evidence for the intelligence of Piltdown Man. He'd found a tool or implement fashioned from a fossil elephant bone. Due to its shape, it came to be known as the cricket bat. In fact, Woodward's book on the subject of Piltdown Man was called The Earliest Englishman, and which true Englishman would not be buried without his cricket bat? In 1915, Dawson writes to Woodward announcing, "I think we're in luck again." He'd found yet another fragment of skull similar to the first in a field nearby. This clearly proved that the first skull could not have been a freak individual or somehow a one-off, and the new fragment came to be known as Piltdown 2. Dawson died shortly after this discovery in 1916. He didn't reveal the location of Piltdown 2 before he died. Interestingly enough though, no further artifacts were found around Piltdown after his untimely death. The impact of the Piltdown find in the press was immediate and sensational. It fed the narrative at the time that human development occurred in the Western world, and in particular Europe, and to have the find in Britain fitted with the notion of the British Empire and its imperialistic outlook being foremost. Piltdown Man significantly affected research on early human evolutions for decades. In particular, it led scientists down a blind alley in the belief that the human brain expanded in size before the jaw adapted to new types of food. This legacy persisted for almost half a century and certainly held back the understanding of human development across the world for all that time. One immediate notable exception to the general coverage was by the Daily Express newspaper, which referred to the discovery as a woman, but only to mock the suffragette movement, of which the Express was extremely critical. Over the next 40 or so years, over 500 scientific papers were written on Piltdown Man. Also during this period, a number of other finds of human ancestors had been found around the world. The Piltdown Man didn't seem to fit into any of these types. The Piltdown Man remains were still considered to be legitimate, but paradoxical. A new method of dating ancient remains known as fluorine dating had been developed in the period since the Piltdown discoveries, and this method had been tried on the Piltdown artifacts by Kenneth Oakley. Now, Kenneth Page Oakley, born in 1911, was an English physical anthropologist, paleontologist and geologist, and he is particularly known for dating fossils by means of fluorine tests. However, the results when conducted on Piltdown Man were unclear, and the artifacts gave inconsistent results. Enter Professor Joseph Wiener. Joe Wiener was a South African born in 1915 who went to the UK in 1937 originally to work in research at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. By 1953, Wiener was at Oxford at the Faculty of Anthropology and Geography. At a dinner in 1953, the subject of Piltdown came up, and someone asked Kenneth Oakley whether any further excavations had been made at Piltdown. He responded by saying that quite a lot of work had been done, but that nothing had been found. "What about Piltdown 2?" he was asked. His response was that we don't quite know where Piltdown 2 is. Wiener thought this decidedly odd and decided to take a look at Piltdown again. By the evening, he had come to the conclusion that someone had deliberately put the collection together, and his hypothesis was that this was a fraud. Wiener took a direct look at the jawbone, which he thought suspiciously looked like a chimpanzee. Now we know that it's an orangutan. Looking at the teeth, he came to the conclusion that they had been filed down. He conducted his own experiments by filing down teeth of a chimpanzee and then staining them, and then presented his findings to his boss, Wilfred LaGrosse Clark. Convinced that something was afoot, they contacted Oakley and instructed him to take another look at the Piltdown teeth. Clear evidence of the teeth having been filed down was uncovered. Shortly after, the new technique of carbon dating confirmed their suspicions. The remains of the cranium or skull was identified as being only a few hundred years old, in other words medieval, and not the 1 million or so years needed for the findings to be the missing link. A summary of Piltdown artifacts showed them to be comprised of 2 human skulls, an orangutan jaw, an elephant molar, a hippopotamus tooth, and a canine tooth from a chimpanzee. The skulls are thought to be from Patagonia, the jaw from Borneo, the elephant molar from Tunisia, the hippopotamus tooth from Malta or Sicily, and the tooth from a Pleistocene chimpanzee. The skulls had been treated with acid and then stained with iron sulfate, and the tooth had been painted brown and patched with putty. The molars had been filed down, and the portion of the orangutan jaw that connected it to the skull was carefully broken so that there was no evidence the jaw did not belong to the human skull. In addition, cavities in the teeth and bones were stuffed with pebbles and then covered with putty to make them heavier, akin to fossils. The obvious question that people then asked when confronted with the hoax is, who did it? A number of people have actually fallen under the spotlight for this, and almost 20 suspects have been named at one time or another in the years since 1953. One of the more interesting suspects is Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the author of the Sherlock Holmes books. Doyle actually lived near Piltdown, was a member of the same archaeological society as Dawson, and was into spiritualism, which scientists mocked. Perhaps this was his way of getting back at them. Even in one of his books, The Lost World, there appear to be clues referring him to being involved in the hoax. However, the overwhelming amount of circumstantial evidence points to one man, Charles Dawson. He was the one who had the original skull handed to him by workmen years before. He was always there when findings were made. Nothing was ever found when he was not there. He was the only person connected with Piltdown 2, and more recently an examination of other non-Piltdown related artifacts that Charles Dawson had either claimed to have acquired or found took place. Over his amateur career of some 20 to 25 years, nearly 40 items have been identified as clear frauds or forgeries, and a number of others have clearly suspicious elements. Perhaps the most direct evidence has come about only in the last few years. In 2016, researchers at the Natural History Museum analysed DNA evidence of a tooth that Charles Dawson had discovered in 1915. This came from the same jaw as that of Piltdown Man. As the tooth was discovered several kilometres from the Piltdown Man site, this strongly suggests that Dawson had planted the other Piltdown artefacts, including Piltdown Man 2. In 1893, Charles Dawson was 29 and keen to progress his amateur standing as an antiquarian and geologist. He presented a small statuette to staff at the British Museum. He claimed that he had acquired this some 16 years earlier from a workman who had been tasked with clearing away a large slag heap from a Roman smelting site at Beaufort Park near Hastings in the UK. Dawson claimed that the statuette was made of cast iron. However, a number of experts from the museum pronounced the statue to be a wrought iron modern copy of a life-sized statue in Rome. This was extremely frustrating for Dawson, as if the statue had been validated, then it would be the only example of a cast iron Roman statue anywhere. This was supposed to be Dawson's introduction to the Society of Antiquaries, where he hoped to become a fellow. He wouldn't accept their findings, writing, "Under the circumstances, and in the absence of further evidence, the author is disposed to claim that this little statuette is Roman or Anglo-Roman, and the earliest known example of cast iron in Europe at least." As the statue, as would later be proven, was actually cast, and Dawson no doubt knew this, it would have been extremely frustrating to him that the experts pronounce it to be wrought iron. Later, more modern scientific methods would identify it as being a fake of the Roman era. Some writers have conjectured that from this moment onwards, Dawson felt discredited and rejected by the establishment, and this was the point he decided to become a master faker. The experts, it appears, were extremely gullible. It wasn't until 2003, following a study of all Dawson's discoveries, was the true extent of his fraudulent findings uncovered. In 1893, in Levant, Chichester, UK, he discovered a flint mine full of prehistoric Roman and medieval artifacts, a number of which turned out to be faked. Also in 1893, he presented the British Museum a Roman statuette, as we've already noted. He discovered a strange form of Neolithic axe and a well-preserved ancient timber boat. He found faked evidence for the final days of the Roman occupation of Britain at Pevensey Castle in Sussex. He presented in 1901 to the Brighton and Hove Natural History and Philosophical Society a most bizarre finding, that of a petrified toad inside a flint nodule, which was nicknamed Toad in the Hole. Now, for the uninitiated, Toad in the Hole is actually the name of a sausage and Yorkshire pudding batter dish, and despite popular belief, there is no record of the dish ever being made with toad. He reported seeing a sea serpent in the English Channel, saw a new species of human, made a study of the Bayeux tapestry, and discovered a strange goldfish-carp hybrid, and well, the list goes on. One incidental fact, not relating to paleontology or archaeology, was that he was reported experimenting with phosphorescent bullets as a way of dealing with the Zeppelin attacks on London. However, he remains and is most infamous for being the discoverer of Piltdown Man, billed at the time as being the famous missing link between humans and the great apes. This picture, painted by John Cook in 1915, shows Charles Dawson and Arthur Smith Woodward with a number of dignitaries examining the Piltdown skull, and note the picture behind them is of Charles Darwin. Hoax or fraud? Now this is a close one. A hoax is defined in the dictionary as a humorous or malicious deception, whereas a fraud is a wrongful or criminal deception intended to result in financial or personal gain. Because we think that the perpetrator of this fraud is Charles Dawson, and he was motivated by his desire to get back at the establishment and his personal self-aggrandizement, and he certainly craved the personal accolade that the discovery of the Piltdown Man bestowed upon him, on balance we think fraud.